Hello and welcome to my channel, In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today is my awards ceremony for the books that I read in 2023. I went through all of the books that I read in 2023, which as I'm filming this, I still have a couple more days. According to Goodreads, I've read 94. According to my reading journal, where I physically keep track of all my books, I have actually already hit the 100 mark, and I'm going to finish a couple of more before the year ends. So I don't know who's right or wrong, but suffice it to say, I read around 100 books in 2023, which was good for me. It was better than the previous years. So like 2 or 3 years, I had kind of hit a bit of a slump. So that was good. Out of those books, I chose the best in about, I don't know, I guess I've got 10 to 12 different categories here. I chose the very best in each one, and then I have a runner-up in each category also. So I'm not going to run through all the books I read in 2023 because that would take forever, but I did want to recap and think through what I read in 2023 and just think through what were the very best, which ones I really loved. And maybe some of these could be recommendations for you. Or if you've already read them, you can let me know if you agree with my awards or not. So to get started, my first category is the best Christian fiction, which is a broad category, I grant you, but that's what we're going to start with. And the very best one, which is one of my top books overall for the year, is The Extraordinary Deaths of Mrs. Kipp by Sarah Brunsvold, which I read on Kindle. That one was just the best Christian fiction book I've read in a really long time. And hey, Christian authors and publishers out there, I want to see more of that. It would be amazing. It was just really well written, first of all, and interesting, kept my attention, but it also had some really profound truth and really shared those truths, not in a pedantic or a preachy way, but in just a really beautiful setting of a story. So I enjoyed it. I would love to see more books like that by Christian authors. And if you know of any that are similar, let me know. I'd love to read them. So that was my very favorite Christian fiction of 2023. But I had 2 runner-ups for this one, and I do have copies of both of these. One runner-up is When the Day Comes, and also the second book, which I forget the name of it at the moment. I read both of them this past year. So When the Day Comes, and then other book, the next one in the series by Gabrielle Meyer, is a time travel series, which I have never read before, and I haven't really been much into time travel for the most part, but the concept, the way that she does it, and the creativity with which she explores it is just fascinating. So that's a huge draw for me in this book, the fascinating way that she handles the time travel aspect of it. And it was so interesting. And the characters in the stories, the main girls were just really very likable characters, and then was good character development as their story went on. And the people that they meet and the things that they experience. I also really, really, really loved how the way that she's doing the time travel kind of compares different aspects of American history, like different episodes in American history, and compares and contrasts them, which was really, really cool. So I thoroughly enjoyed these books in this series, and I'm very much looking forward to, I think, 2 more are coming out next year in 2024. I will definitely be reading those. Then the other runner-up was All the Lost Places by Amanda Dykes, which her writing is just so beautiful. And I love her prose and her narrations, just lovely. And I could read it just for that. But this particular story was also a very well done story, very interesting story, interesting characters, and intriguing. The setting was the other thing that I really loved about this. I love the prose. I loved the setting. The setting in Venice, Italy, was just beautiful, and she really draws out the beauty of it and the mystery and the intrigue of it. Very well done. And There's also a setting in I think it's Venice Beach, California as well. Both of them are historic settings. So, and it's dual timeline, which I enjoy. Not everybody's cup of tea, but I enjoy a dual timeline story. And I loved the main character and how he was lost, and what he was looking for and how he found it, and etc. Anyway, very beautiful, well-told story that was just a delight to read. I love everything by Amanda Dykes, so whatever she writes next, I will read that too. So that is for the best Christian fiction category. So for the best general market fiction, I have A Gentleman in Moscow, which honestly I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did, for reasons, but I did enjoy it very much. It definitely ranks as the best general market fiction that I read in 2023. It's kind of epic in the sense that it covers many years. Like, it covers decades in the life of a gentleman who's living in a hotel in Moscow, and the things that he experiences there. It's a very confined setting. So that can seem a little bit, boring maybe at times, but overall, it keeps your interest for the most part. And also the author wisely skips large chunks of time as he's telling the story, and like fast forwards to key moments, so it doesn't get too bogged down. So overall, a very well done book that I enjoyed a lot. And one of my goals is in 2024 is to read more by this author. The other one I read, which I do not have a physical copy of, and actually interestingly, both of these books I read last January, so nothing else quite lived up to them. The other one was The Snow Child by, I don't know how to say the name. It's like one of those like Irishish kind of names, Eowyn, I think, Ivy. Anyway, it was based on the Russian fairy tale about the Snow Maiden, and has a little bit of magical realism. It's the ending kind of leaves you with some questions. It's not a cozy read, but it is a good read for wintertime. It's not cozy because it's not like a heartwarming, really sort of story. It deals with some really heavy things. It deals with infertility and loss and the marriage relationship gone awry in one way or another. And it deals with the hardships of, trying to eke out a living in the Alaskan wilderness. So it's not like a pleasant, joyful sort of read, but it's really good for January. The setting very much has a January feel to it, and it's just beautifully written. Not a really satisfying ending, honestly, but definitely worth the time reading it. So that is my runner-up for the general market fiction category. And now for Christian nonfiction, I don't think anybody is going to be surprised about my top pick here, because I've raved about it a lot. So I won't say too much more in this video, but I really loved Heaven by Randy Alcorn. It was just such an encouragement to me, and kind of gave me a really good perspective that I never really considered in that way, of what heaven will be like and what eternity will be like, and just kind of rethinking what the Bible teaches about that in a very realistic, practical kind of way. Like, what is life really going to be like? So that one I enjoyed very much. My runner-up is, which I also have talked about recently on this channel, so I won't go into too much more detail, but Fervent by Priscilla Shirer, which I really enjoyed. It was very challenging. This was a very practical read in terms of giving you like ways to pray and verses to use in your prayer for your family, for your spiritual life, for your walk with the Lord, for the things that you struggle with, whether it's stress or fear or whatever. So this was a very helpful book, and I am hanging on to that one to use kind of as a reference. And then for the best secular nonfiction, I don't have a copy of this, although I would love to have one. A Fine Romance, Falling in Love with the English Countryside, which I forget the name of the author but she's a blogger, and she's written a lot of delightful little books that are like handwritten and hand-drawn with illustrations. She's an artist, and just really, really lovely little books. And this particular book was about her and her husband's trip to England, and they went on the ocean liner to and from, and so that was part of the book. And then they had spent a lovely, I don't know, 2-3 weeks or more in the English countryside, and she draws pictures and she tells little stories about all of the places that they visited there. And there was a lot of like literary connections because, you know, she loves reading also, and so they went to a lot of places with literary connections in the book, and including Beatrix Potter's house. And anyway, it was lovely to read. It was a whole reading experience that I enjoyed. And also, I already had this dream, and that's why I picked the book up, but it totally reinforced my dream, and my husband and I are hoping and praying for our 20th anniversary that we will be able to do a similar trip. Not that long, because, you know, we can't afford that, but and we would only take the ship one way and fly back the other way, or fly there and take the ocean liner back, or vice versa. But anyways, that is our goal. We'll see if we're able to make it happen. But anyway, and we would go to different places. I mostly want to go to Bath with my husband. That's my big dream. And then surrounding environs in England there. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, that was my favorite general nonfiction of the year. The runner-up was If You Lived Here, I'd Know Your Name. And my family we went to Alaska earlier this year, and so I read several books set in or about Alaska during that time. And this one was kind of a memoir of sorts, I guess, written by a woman who lives in Alaska, in a small town in Alaska near Juneau, I think. And just about their life in that small town, why they moved there, the people in the town, and the things that happened. Anyway, it was just very delightfully written. There was a lot of humor, but also a lot of touching moments also. Some of the things that I will never forget, like when she talked about how, so because of where they lived in Alaska, they had to like take a ferry or take a helicopter or whatever. Like they couldn't just drive. And also, if any sort of issue happened in the winter or when it was snowing, which is like half the year, right? Like there's a good chance that they couldn't get the helicopter, or they couldn't, the ferry wouldn't be running because of ice. So there was one story she told about, well, there was stories she's told about, you know, the kind of hairy moments trying to have her babies, but also one was when one of her kids ended up having appendicitis, and a snowstorm had just started, and so they had to get out of town, and they were kind of like trying to beat this snowstorm. They were trying to cross the border into Canada to get to a really good hospital, and it was like 5 hours, and she's got a kid with appendicitis in the back seat. And I was like, why would you live in Alaska? Why? I am never doing that. I mean, Alaska is beautiful, and I would love to visit it. I do think I could maybe live in Homer, Alaska. I think it's close enough to actual civilization and I think there's like, you know, enough like structure there, and it's beautiful, and that makes up for anything that's not there. But otherwise, I don't think I could do it. So if you live in Alaska, I'm already impressed. You don't really have to do too much more to impress me. It's already impressive that you live there. Anyway, that was a really good book. And I need to get moving a lot faster because this video is going to be like an hour and a half long if I don't move it along. So we will not talk so much more about any of the books. Let's get going because I have quite a few more categories to share with you. The next one is the best classic that I read in 2023. And that would be Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. Not a great surprise because I love Charles Dickens, and this may not be my favorite of his books that I have read so far, but I did really love it, and it really stuck with me. And it was worth every page of those many pages. And this is the only copy I have, so I really need to get a nicer edition of that. But Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens, and I've talked a lot about it on this blog before, so I don't need to tell anymore. The runner-up would be Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which also I read recently and talked a lot about. I do want to just say that it is the runner-up not because the content of the story per se. I didn't really love the characters, and I didn't really love what was happening in this story. I had some issues with it, but the writing was extraordinary, and it really just stuck with you, and it made you think, and there were a lot of layers there. So I can admire it as a well-crafted piece of art, even if I'm like, okay, well, those characters were, and what they did was, but it was a well-written book. So also a little bit of a caveat, and that leads me to my next category. I also read several other books this year, several other classics that I would totally rank higher than both of those probably, but they were rereads. So those were the best classics, and Rebecca was technically a reread, but I didn't remember it, and I didn't reread it because it was like, oh, I love this book. I reread it because I couldn't remember it. So I did reread some other books because I loved them, and those would be my favorite all-time classics list. These books would be on it, and that would be Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Much Ado About Nothing, and Anne of the Island by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Of all the books that I reread this year, that is my next category, the best reread. And the best reread was Pride and Prejudice. I mean, the best ever. And I love this little cloth-bound edition that I have. It was fun to read it from this, by the way, this time. It's like the perfect size for your hands. I love it. And then I do not have a physical, never mind. What am I talking about? So my other favorite reread of the year was, not this entire book. It was Much Ado About Nothing, which is in this book. So Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare. I had read many years ago, watched the movie several times, and really loved rereading the book earlier this year. Where to put this giant tome? Out of the way. Okay. Next, the best poetry. The first one goes to Edgar Allan Poe, which again, I did not read everything in this book, but all his poetry is in here. My favorite is The Bells, which I read here on this channel, and The Raven. I also read this past year. I read several other of his poetry in this book in October, November time period, and I just really love his poetry. One of my favorite poets for sure, and I just love the symmetry and the imagery and the rhythm of his poetry writing. Just my favorite. So he gets the award for best poetry, but the runner-up is Robert Service, who at the turn of the 20th century was a journalist and poet living in the Yukon. And he is very well loved by Alaska and people who live in that part of Canada, up there in the north. And I read his poetry while we were in Alaska, and it just really seems to have captured, I mean, I'm not Alaskan obviously, but captured the essence of life in Alaska. And I used the quotes from his poetry. I put in my picture book that I made using the photos from our trip, and it was just beautiful descriptions of the gorgeous landscape and the natural beauty of Alaska. Just lovely poetry. And he wrote some like lovely poetry with beautiful imagery, etc. and stuff, but he also wrote a lot of like ballads and that sort of thing about life in Alaska, and, you know, tall tales kind of folksy sort of poems. So all of it I enjoyed very much. Very accessible poetry. So that was my runner-up. And next category. Now these are just more like, the following categories are going to be more like aspects of the book, rather than like strict categories of types of books. Does that make sense? Whatever. Let's get going. So the funniest book, the award for funniest book that made me laugh, goes to The Buy-In by Emma St. Clair, which is a rom-com story set in a small town called Sheet Cake, Texas, and extremely funny. So a lot of rom-coms, like about half the humor just falls flat for me because it's almost like the author is trying too hard. But that book by Emma St. Clair, and another book that I read from her this year also, just made me laugh genuinely. Like, it wasn't trying too hard. It was just really genuinely funny. So I enjoyed those. The runner-up for that category is Georgette Hare, which she has a great sense of humor and great wit. So her books are also generally very funny. Even her murder mystery that I read in December was funny as well. So Arabella is a funny. We'll have some laugh out loud scenes. Probably her funniest one that I read, I think, might be Frederica, if I'm remembering correctly, but all of her books have some great humor in them. So the next category, the saddest, the books that made me cry. And I had a few of those this year, but two that stuck out, and I also talked about these at length. One is The Light Still Shines, which is a memoir about the murder of the Amish children in the schoolhouse in Pennsylvania in the 2000s. And this was written by the wife of the man who committed the crime. And it was just such a wonderful story of God's grace and how he can help someone get through literally the worst possible of life situations and come through the other side stronger and better as a person, and how God can work through even the most awful situations. So that one made me cry so much, ugly tears. And then the other one, which I do not have a physical copy of, is Marmee, which is based on, I forget the name of the author, Sarah Miller maybe, but it tells the story of Little Women, but from Marmee's perspective, as if she's writing in her diary. And it made me cry also because, I mean, lots of reasons, but in particular, Beth, yeah, always makes me cry. Especially probably from Marmee's perspective, even more so. So yeah, definitely cried a lot reading that story. The next one is the deepest books, the books that made me think the most. And the first one would be On Reading Well by Karen Swallow Prior, and she goes through different books and talks about different aspects of virtue and how they are presented or not presented in the storyline and in the characters, and how the character quality or the virtue is handled in the story. It wasn't what I was expecting when I picked up the book, but it definitely made me think, and it gave me an appreciation for a variety of classics that I had read or not read. And it also kind of gave me some things to look for when reading good literature. And so I really enjoyed reading that, and it definitely made me think much more deeply about books. And then the other one, the runner-up, would be Mama Bear Apologetics, which goes through a variety of big, like, kind of hot-button topics of the day, and looking at them from a perspective of what the Bible would say about it. Also, you know, a bit of like a historical, philosophical perspective, I guess, to a certain extent. And just analyzing what should be our response to these cultural shifts from a biblical perspective. So that one definitely made me think. And that sort of topic always is going to require a lot of thinking through issues and thinking through, you know, biblical principles and doctrine, etc. So anyway, that was one that was good for thinking. Then, the worst books. The book that made me waste my time. And the first one that gets this award is The Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rice, which I just hated. Gonna be honest, really didn't like it at all. It was, the storytelling was so disjointed. I didn't know what was going on half the time. I didn't feel like it 100% stuck to, it was supposed to be like a backstory of Bertha from Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. But I feel like it didn't quite stick to the story as told by Bronte. It was a little bit too imaginative and went in strange directions that I didn't love personally. But mostly it was just disjointed and hard to understand. Like half the time you're reading and you're like, what? I don't know. Like that it doesn't make sense. So I did not enjoy it. Probably I'm just not intellectual enough for it. I'll say that. We'll go with that. And then we have The Violinist of Venice by, I think, Alyssa Palumbo was the author's name, which both of these I did have physical copies, but I did not keep them for reasons. The Violinist of Venice I disliked for different reasons. It was supposed to be about Vivaldi, the Violinist of Venice, right? But it wasn't actually very much about Vivaldi. It was more about a woman that, you know, this is a fictional character that he had a relationship with. Because there is a theory, there is a woman who appeared, a girl really, who appeared later in Vivaldi's life, who he took with him on trips, who he provided for, who he gave special treatment to, like gave her special roles in operas, etc., etc. So the assumption at the time and among some circles now is that she was his mistress, girlfriend, whatever, which was pretty taboo because he was a priest. But actually, there's also some evidence that it was actually his daughter. So, which makes sense to me. For a lot of reasons, which I won't go into because this video is already too long. But this story was supposed to be about the woman that had the relationship with, who then had the daughter, and how it came, how all of this came about to be. And so it was kind of interesting in that sense. But the girl, the woman in the story that he had the relationship with, I mean, I don't know. I didn't need to read about her and her super poor choices all her whole extreme life long, like just one bad choice after another. Yeah, and the consequences of it. I mean, she was fictional and everything, but yeah. So that combined with the fact that there was very little actually about Vivaldi in the story, which is why the whole reason I was reading it, waste of my time. So let's not waste any more time talking about those. Moving on, the heaviest books, books that dealt with weighty issues. The first one, which I have also talked about a lot here, is The Five, which is about the 5 women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper. I mean, that's heavy already. But these women, their lives were so hopeless. And it was hard to read. Very heavy reading material. Their lives were so hopeless. Some of them were wanting to break out of the cycle of poverty that they got stuck in, but were unable to succeed. Some of them honestly didn't try very hard. But all of them, it was just heavy to read about their lives and the things that they struggled with. So that's the winner of that award. And then the next one, the runner-up, is I Am a Cat, which doesn't sound like it should be a heavy book, but it was. And it was funny in spots, and it was supposed to be like very funny. A lot of the humor just fell flat for me. It's a Japanese classic. And it is about the life of this family, mostly this professor in Japan in the early 20th century, I think. It's the story of their life as told through the eyes of their cat. But the cat was a horrible cat. He wasn't good at any of the things that cats normally are good at, like catching mice, for example. But he was very good at lengthy monologues about various issues, political, historical, philosophical, religious, etc. And he wrote, the cat wrote pages long essays about these topics, very heavy topics. Dealt with a lot of heavy topics. The actual story wasn't heavy at all. Like, it was just, you know, kind of like days in the life of this Japanese family. Maybe some heavier things happening, but the story itself wasn't heavy. It just was like weighty, dealing with a lot of like big topics. Then that leads me right into my next category, the boringest books that made me sleep. And guess what wins that one? I Am a Cat. Yes, literally. I would try to read it every night, like read a little bit every night, and I literally would fall asleep reading it. And I very often would not get very far before totally falling asleep. That cat made me fall asleep. I don't think the cat slept much, but it made me sleep. And then the other one, the runner-up, is The Task and Other Poems by William Cooper, which I like William Cooper's hymns. But this particular, and I'm probably some of his other poetry as well, but this particular collection of poetry, it just meandered through a cycle of like 5 different topics related to the history of England and religious things and philosophical things and whatever, and just revisiting the same topics but from slightly different angles, and just very meandering and often seemingly pointless, but at the same time hammering the same ideas over and over again. Yeah, I pushed through and read the entire thing, but it was not my favorite poetry ever, I'm just gonna say. Okay, then the biggest surprise, a book that exceeded my expectations. And the first one, the winner, is The Glass Town, which is, I forget the name of the author, but it's a graphic novel, which I did not expect to love because normally graphic novels are not my thing, but I really loved it. And I've talked about it a lot on here, so I won't say any more, but that one surprised me by how much I really enjoyed it. It was a very good book. And then another one that surprised me was Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. Now, I was not surprised that I liked a book by Anne Bronte, but I was just surprised by how easy a read it was. Like, the Bronte books tended to be, you know, a little heavier or more obscure. This was a very light read. It felt like a Christian fiction romance read, honestly, is what it came across to me as. So I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it, but also how, like, just of a pleasant, delightful read it was, and not like a really heavy, deep thinking kind of, it's nothing like her other book, The Tenant of Bodfell Hall. Very different tone and feel to it, length, everything, very different. So the next category is the most romantic book, the book that made me sigh, and the winner of that is Appointment in Bath by Mimi Matthews, who she excels at writing great romance. And this particular one is part of a series. I forget the name of the series, and I have talked about that one also here on the channel, so I won't go into too much detail, really any detail, but I did enjoy that one. I enjoyed the relationship. The girl was shy, and she'd been very sheltered, etc. And the guy was kind of like supposed to be like a little bit like Romeo and Juliet to a certain extent, kind of story, which their families were like enemies. And the story of how they come together, and yet how she is able to still respect and love her father, even though he's not a very good guy. Anyway, it was just very well done. One of her better books, in my opinion. And then the other one that I really enjoyed was Dusk's Darkest Shores by Carolyn Miller. Carolyn Miller is another one who really excels she excels at Regency romances. Hers are some of my favorites, being really good, nice emotionally, but good development of the relationship, and anyway, just very well done. And Dusk's Darkest Shores, I liked the character development in this story. The gentleman in this story is blind, and so she is helping him to be able to, heal from the emotional trauma, really, is what ends up happening. But also she helps him to be able to thrive in spite of his blindness, and to learn how to cope with it, and how to feed himself and put on his clothes and all of this stuff. So, and really kind of gives him a renewed hope for life because of that. So that was really good. All right, so those are the more subjective awards. I'm going to wrap up with a few more objective awards. The next one is the longest book, and that was and this is according to Goodreads, by the way, Little Dorrit. And according to Goodreads, that has 1,021 pages. My copy only has 816, but that's because the print is really tiny. So that was the longest book that I read, Little Dorrit. The shortest book I read, there actually were two. One was Moby Dick, and that was a graphic novel. Isn't that ironic? The shortest book I read was, I'll say it again, Moby Dick. Ladies and gentlemen, that is how you should read Moby Dick. I've never read the whole thing, the longest book one. I read the graphic novel and I'm good. I don't need to read the real Moby Dick. I think I got the main points, and from everything I've heard, I'm not missing out on anything reading the full-length one. So I just think it's ironic and hilarious that that is the shortest book that I read this year, Moby Dick. Who knew? Read the graphic novel version. You'll thank me later. And the other one was The Lady of Shalott, which is a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And yes, thin little volume. This is actually like a kind of like a children's book version of it, but I love the illustrations in it. That was the other shortest book. They both were 48 pages, randomly. All right, and then according to Goodreads, the most popular book that I read this year, which over 7 million people have shelved this book on Goodreads, guys. 7 million people. That's a lot. And that is Pride and Prejudice. We're not surprised. It's an amazing book. I'm not surprised. I mean, love this. There's a reason it's popular. And the least popular book that I read this year, that is only found on 41 shelves on Goodreads, is Dalcroze Eurythmics in Today's Music Classroom. So I read that in September in preparation for the new school year. It is currently at my school, and I reference it quite a bit in planning my lessons. And yeah, so there you go, my awards for the books that I read in 2023 out of 100 books, approximately, give or take, and around 30,000 pages. So what would you choose for some of these awards? Like, what was your best Christian fiction or regular fiction, or what book made you cry? What book made you laugh? Let me know if any come to your mind. Did you read any of these? Do you agree with my awards? Let me know in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. If you have made it this far in this video, give me a little book stack emoji, and I will see you next time. Bye.